So now we have Luke Callier from Wesley College in Western Australia. So let's see with Luke how they have managed change and further engage with the community in your school. Please welcome Luke.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I think it's been a really exciting 2 days, and I thank you for sticking around to the last presentation from the schools. My name's Luke Callier. I was the project manager of the rollout at Wesley College in Perth, and a journey that started for us kind of 3 years ago, sitting at the 2016 meetup. And as we've come to understand, and something that I'll come back to a little bit later in the presentation, is what we've learned is that it's a journey that never really ends with Schoolbox. And just have a think about that, and we'll come back to that. But joining me today for the presentation is Matt Irving. Matt's our Director of Strategy at Wesley College, and together we're going to take you, I guess, on a little bit of a journey about how we saw change management unfolding in our school, and I'm sure you'll probably hear some similar things to what we just said from Luke and Kay, and I know that we certainly heard a lot of similarities between us. So what is change? I guess for us, enacting change was really about two things, and that's really around how we lead and how we manage. And through leadership and management, you really create that change. And they sound simple. I mean, every school's got leaders and managers, but it's the intricate kind of skills of those people that really can deliver positive change within a school. So diving in deeper, Matt will take us through the leadership from a college's executive point of view, kind of the vision, the broad picture, brushstrokes, and kind of zooming out on the project. And then we'll both discuss the management through kind of the input, output, and impact on the school lens. And then zooming into kind of some finer grained detail around some of the tips and lessons that we learned along the way. And hopefully, at the end, like I know I have in many of the other presentations, you'll take home a couple of little nuggets of gold. So, Matt.
Cool. What's good about my role is I just get to think about the big picture and the big ideas, and he has to do all the work. And so it's a great role that I have and the one we share. I guess I just wanted to recap what we talked about this morning in terms of leadership. We all have a responsibility in this room as change agents. We have a job to be curious, to explore and generate ideas. We have a responsibility to seek new futures, to influence our organisations, but most importantly, we exist in our workplaces to develop better outcomes for our kids. That's why we're here. And my argument with the teams that I work with, particularly the leaders I work with, is that if you have that responsibility, therefore you have to be a strategist. Just because it's in my title doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility in that space. So we make that clear to all our leaders across our college. And if you understand that responsibility, you need to then think about, well, how does that transfer to change? And I argue in the work that I do, and I do with other schools as well, is that you need to have a strong strategy frame. And our friends from Cairns have already described some of this to you. And this is the sort of steps that I take our staff through. One, you've got to be really clear who you are. Be really clear about your vision and your culture. We know that 80% of a good strategy or a good project coming to fruition is being very clear of who you are. So many times we go down rabbit holes. So many times we do death by action. Let's be clear. Let's start with who we are. And we miss this in schools too many times. Where are we? And Peter talked about that this morning, looking at that horizon, looking at the environment and looking at our landscape. Where do we sit? What are the challenges that we face? And we talked about needs analysis. That's part of that experience. Where we want to be, that aspiration of where we're heading. What are the objectives that we have? The next bit that people don't do terribly well in schools, and what I see, is being very clear how you're going to get there. And again, our friends in Cairns talk about those actions, those action plans. What are the steps? What are the building blocks to success? But more importantly, you might have a simple frame like that. If you don't know that desired impact that you want to have, that end goal, why start Schoolbox? If you're not really clear about that, don't start. So at Wesley, our vision is to be an innovative learning community where students are empowered to lead, empowered to live successful lives. And as part of that vision, our strategic plan is based around the student. We don't base our strategic plan around our organisation. The student is at the centre. And we have a desire that all our students become strong thinkers, purposeful doers, positive connectors and powerful self-activators. We think if they're going to navigate uncertain futures, if they're going to navigate life beyond the school gates, these are the things that we need to develop in them. And so what I'm starting to do here is just kind of shape how we got into Schoolbox. From a strategic lens, that's great, that's just words. Thanks, Matt, fantastic. What does it actually mean? What does it actually look like? So, like many schools in the country, we've developed capabilities. We have 7 capabilities that are measures that we use as a vehicle to embed in assessment, to embed in curriculum, to embed in that teaching and learning. And we measure it. We have a pre-K to 12 scale, and we use rubrics, and we measure growth. All the things that have been spoken about, and I think James was speaking about that earlier this morning as well. So these are the things from a strategic perspective, and from the things that we wanted to get after, from a curriculum perspective, started to come together in terms of why perhaps we went to Schoolbox. So I'll let Luke take over the next part.
So I guess we've talked about the school goals and how they, I guess, came to be. I guess kind of drilling that down to Schoolbox goals, we kind of decided what will our specific goals be and what's the drivers of why we chose Schoolbox over the other platforms. And as was mentioned earlier, we went through a very similar process where we looked at other platforms and ended up with a Schoolbox platform. So it was really, for us, there were four goals. Making continuous feedback, digital feedback visible to both other staff members, to parents and to the students. So that was our first goal. It was a real driver for us, but having that continuous feedback. We wanted to collect and kind of examine, I guess, growth. And it wasn't just growth in terms of marks and grades, it was really growth around the capabilities and the stuff that happens that's not necessarily core curriculum. And for that was also a really strong focus for us. Number 3, we wanted more personalised communication. We'd had a lot of feedback from parents through surveys and whatnot that we weren't doing communication very well. Our old portal was pretty stale. Parents were getting 25, 30 emails a day from various stakeholders. And so we kind of understood that communication wasn't really being done well, and parents were kind of letting us know that. And fourthly, we wanted a platform which could, I guess, facilitate richer conversations. What could we go to kind of start a conversation where the outcomes, the learning outcomes, were going to be better? And as a team, kind of along the way, we kind of actually then kind of wanted to talk about how are we going to measure these goals? You know, they're great to have goals, but one of my jobs was really kind of interrogating, okay, how are we going to measure that we're succeeding in these? And we'll come back to that in a little bit.
It's probably good to sort of point out now that this journey's been probably post-Schoolbox as well. As a school, and like many other schools, we had lots of different bits of technology. And in fact, we were developing our own piece of technology. We had a vision for a learning board, and I can't tell you how much money we spent on that for confidentiality reasons. But that particular project went bust. So we had these goals in mind. We knew exactly what we wanted. We then had to go and find that right solution. So I just wanted to give some more shape to that because that's certainly been some schools that had that kind of journey. I want to talk about project management just for a moment, and we've had a couple of frames already. This is the frame that we use at Wesley. We use on all our projects. At the moment we have about 45, and Schoolbox is just one of those. We talk about inputs, outputs, impacts. The pre-work, the post-work, and then that desired goal at the end. And I'm just going to take you through this just a little bit and just give you some anecdotes. From an inputs perspective, that pre-work or that process, if we go back one for me. Great. Really adopts those sort of classical design thinking processes. So what are the assets that you have in your college? What's a review or a needs analysis coming up with? What does the research say? What design elements do you need to spend some time in that ideation phase to exploring ideas? What does prototyping look like? Let's trial something. Let's try something small. Let's refine it, let's get better at it, and of course building capacity. So we talk about inputs in terms of that design thinking process and getting people on the bus. And like you guys talked about before, we brought in our director of ILT, our director of Comrails, brought in a project manager specifically for this. I worked with the executive, we worked with some other teachers, some early adopters. So it was about really understanding what does that building a coalition actually look like? Who are the agitators? I always need a green brain person that's going to stop me in my tracks and go, yeah, but you need to have those people on your team. You also need those yellow brain thinkers that are going to be really creative and think of ideas, and sometimes you might need to hose them down, but they get over it after a while. You've got to have the right mix in the room. Don't have all yes people. So that pre-process work, that design work, absolutely essential. Then our outputs. Well, what's the product? How do we implement it? How do we evaluate what we're doing? How do we make the right decisions? Which lever do I pull when? And what does that roadmap look like? And we invest strongly in roadmaps at Wesley for our projects. We're very clear about our deliverables. We're very clear about what success looks like at different stages. But we're also very, very conscious of the fact that sometimes things aren't working and you need to pivot. You have to be agile. And sometimes we're not good at that at schools. No, this is what we're doing. Sometimes you do have to pivot. And there are other times where you just have to hold the line. But being clear about that end product's really, really important. And the last bit, impact. That's the goal. This is the reason you're doing it. You've already heard this today. And for me, it probably goes even a little bit deeper than just a goal. What's the transformation you want to see in students? What's the transformation you want to see in your organisation? So our project planning happens in this context and just gives you a bit of a sense of how we navigated, I guess, the Schoolbox experience. Some other things that we did in that input phase, like our previous school, we spoke to a lot of schools. We went out and did a lot of travelling. We came to meetups. We hadn't even signed up yet. We hounded Sean and James. We brought them over to the west. It's actually cheaper to fly them here to the Perth than us to fly here. And we just kept drilling them. And we drilled them over a 9 to 12 month period. And they were getting really frustrated. Like really frustrated we weren't signing up. Because we had a clear goal in mind. You have to deliver this. And so some of the work that you see around rubrics and capabilities and all that sort of stuff have been part of those discussions over a little bit of time. One of the other things we spent some time on is really understanding where our stakeholders were. We'd actually eroded some trust with our parents. We'd over-promised and under-delivered. So we knew we had to get some quick wins on the board. And things like feedback, continuous reporting was some of those quick wins. We also knew where our staff were. They were sick of change. They were sick of failed projects. They were sick of someone saying something and then in 2 years we're pivoting and doing something completely different. So we had to build some trust in there. We had to do what we said we would do and be very, very clear about that. We've already talked about the team, and like our previous group, we brought in UX specialists to have a look at our platform, to look at branding. We actually did a project with those UX specialists. Our Schoolbox instance looks just like the rest of our branding. We've actually moved a few things around, so not all the menus are in the exact same spots. And we had a 3-click solution, 3 clicks in, 3 clicks out. Because we had so much architecture, we had to be very clear on how far we were going. From a parent's perspective, like you guys, you talked about your comms. It was really about laying out what does the architecture in Schoolbox look like. If I'm going to sort of get people on board, we've got to be able to communicate what this will do. So breaking it down into that architecture, something like this, was very helpful for us. Likewise for our staff, we had to indicate to them, what are the building blocks for you? From course pages to unit pages to assessment to your class page to feedback. What are the building blocks? What are we going to do first? What are we going to do second? And how is this going to make your life easier?
So from there, we kind of went to kind of the outputs, and kind of, I guess where we got to here was looking at a really detailed roadmap. And I'm going to show a couple of slides in a second around what that looked like for us, I guess externally to our staff and to the parents, but also internally for the team. What were we how were we going to track and plan for what we were going to achieve? A couple of other things up there: communicate to everyone at least 3 months in advance. So similar to before, at least 3 months in advance, we're saying this is coming. Be aware this is coming, and show them glimpses of what it may look like in a couple of months' time. So they're well aware that something's bubbling in the background, and they're kind of going to be prepared for that change. As Matt said, understand the structure, the file structure and its implications. Obviously, with the use of the folder and the file structure, really understanding where you want pages to sit underneath other pages becomes really important. Spending some time getting to understand that, and designing and collaborating on templates. And I think we actually spent a huge amount of time working with lots of different teams, particularly around working out exactly what our course, unit and class pages are going to look like, and then we locked them in. There's no change, so every course, every unit page looks the same, and every class page has components in the same place, at least to start with. So again, students and parents can navigate and actually expect to find things looking the same. So our external roadmap, this is kind of what it looked like. We kind of displayed this to both parents at kind of P&F meetings, any type of parent meeting we could get in front of for the 6 months preceding the implementation or the starting point for parents. We would put this kind of thing up and also for our staff. And it quite clearly kind of articulated, okay, and you can kind of see here we had construction and then we had access. And then we had more construction and then we had more access. So it kind of replicated that kind of circular growth of the platform. The next one here is kind of the internal team, and not too dissimilar to what was described here earlier. We kind of went 18 months out, so before we'd even implemented anything, we kind of had a week by week of what we were going to try and achieve in that week. So we had supporting milestones, we had the staff days, we had what we were going to deliver at that staff day, we had what was being built by who, whether that was teachers, whether that was administration staff, whether that was the Schoolbox team, when we were migrating information, and what we were going to be using and when. And I know from my own personal satisfaction point of view, we sat at the end of that 18 months and we looked back and we'd almost achieved probably 90% of what we'd originally planned to do 18 months earlier. And so it was a really rewarding process. And I think because we were that planned and because we had the roadmaps out in front, it meant that our staff were really kind of brought along on that journey with us because as Matt said, we did what we said we were going to do. This one is really about the migration. So I know that most schools are migrating something from somewhere. They have a portal that's probably not working all that well. So what we did with this was we had every single page listed on an Excel spreadsheet from the portal. This is only about a quarter of the number of pages. And so we tracked how much had been brought across at what point in time so that we could really get a sense of how close we were getting. And who was actually owning that page. And then we could follow that up on a regular basis, which again, I think honoured the work that some people had done before. And I'll probably come back to it a little bit later, but what was really interesting about this was for some of the work that we migrated, it actually allowed us to repurpose the way it was previously presented. And it kind of allowed us to kind of say, well, when we went and looked at the uniform page on our old portal, it was 5 PDFs. Do we really need 5 PDFs for the uniform shop when we can just kind of actually have one page in Schoolbox? So it's kind of repurposing information at the same time as migrating it.
So like any good project, measuring your impact, measuring those goals is really important. Just to give you a few highlights from where we are against our Schoolbox goals that Luke spoke about at the beginning. In terms of continuous feedback, we went really hard at that last year. All assessments now in Schoolbox for us. And by the end of last year, in our first year of implementation of continuous feedback, we had 30,000 pieces of digital feedback that our staff produced for years 5 to 12. All our reports that originate now out of Schoolbox, data into Synergetic, and we're pushing all that data into a new reporting platform, which was an interesting experience. We spent a long time getting the report right and getting back to what our strategic intentions were. We now have rubrics for our capabilities. As I said, we have this sort of 17-band scale. Don't worry about asking questions about it, it's a bit complicated. But what we do is we push that through and we're able to establish that on our reports. And you can just see there down in the corner there what the rubric looks like, but also what it looks like in terms of a report. We're doing sort of a dot and band. This is where we think your child should be in terms of sort of their stage. And this is the result that they got on a teacher judgment. In terms of the other goals, we looked at our personal comms. We've increased our personal visits to Schoolbox from our old portal by 66%. We did that in our first year. So we've really increased that level of engagement. We noticed that parents' time now in Schoolbox is also increasing. They're staying longer on pages, and we are getting 4,500 users per week. So we're maintaining our level of engagement from our parents, which is absolutely fantastic. Just that graph there just demonstrates the lift of engagement and page visits from our old portal to our Schoolbox instance. We're now moving into a really interesting stage where we're doing goal setting, and we're starting to be able to pull that sort of data together and pull it out, track data, and that informs our rich conversations we have with our parents. So we're doing some interesting stuff there and doing some stuff around our e-portfolio in our junior school. So they're just some of the sort of little bits that we are sort of presenting back to our staff, back to our parents to indicate where we are in our journey, and then also starting to preload where we're going next.
I just want to go back to one point here with the capabilities. That 17-point scale is really the result of that growth conversation that we were having very early on. And our goal is that over time, that you'll see growth on that journey, on those capabilities over the number of years that they're at Wesley, which is, I think, a really interesting kind of mindset from one year to the next. They'll all be on the same growth pattern there. So beyond impact, I guess things that we found along the way. And the first thing up there I've got is voice of the leaders. I think it can be really underestimated how important it was to have a member of the exec team in Matt and in our deputy head kind of getting up and saying, this is what we're doing. It certainly carries a very different weight to someone from an IT team or me as a project manager saying, this is what we're going to do and it's great. When it comes from the leaders, certainly carries a lot more weight. There are efficiency. There are lots of efficiencies to be gained from Schoolbox, so really kind of exploit those early on, and I'll come back to one or two of those in a minute. And give away stuff that's redundant. I think it was mentioned a little bit earlier, but be okay with saying, let's stop the old practice because it's adding no value to what we're doing. So get rid of that and let's start doing this. The clarity of expectations and the accountability of follow-up. I think for us, being able to, for the first time, kind of, just got a little sign at the back there saying we've got a few minutes to go, so I'll try and wrap up a little bit quicker. We've influenced other areas of the business, especially when it comes to clarity, and I think particularly the view of the consumer. And I think just going on from the point that was made earlier, one thing that we really kind of struggled to do as a school was to shift staff from, I create this document that I display to parents, but this document's actually for me in managing what I do in the school. Well, that's great, and you can manage that area of your school, but when a parent looks at that, they can't understand that. So repurposing what staff are doing for a view for parents was really, I guess, a struggle for some areas of our school, which was really important. The pastoral tab, wanted to quickly say, we created our own report, which came out of the pastoral system. So on a daily basis, our staff, our middle managers and senior managers get a daily one-page PDF, which summarises all of the pastoral comments from the day before, which gives a new transparency that we've never really had, and our pastoral kind of reporting wasn't that great in the past. I guess I've got 10 tips plus a bonus there. I'll quickly try and run through some of them. I think one was mentioned earlier. The real cost really isn't about the software, it's really about the cost of the entire change process and investing in that appropriately. Showcase what's coming, being very clear on staff expectations, and don't waver from that. Don't allow people to kind of get away with not doing something. Workshops. Every staff day we had workshops in Schoolbox, and we still do, and don't miss those opportunities. Videos in your own instance. Create videos. I know that Schoolbox have some great ones, but also supplement that with videos in your own instance, because people can kind of see, oh, that's where I'm going in our instance. Migration, we've talked about. Management by walking around. I think that's underestimated sometimes, in terms of just walking into admin areas and saying, how you going? Anything I can help you with? Or walking past classrooms is really important. Pick your lowest hanging fruit. Attendance was a winner for us. 2 clicks to be able to do attendance was significantly better than the previous experience for staff, and they all got on board with that really quickly, which meant we had better wins later on down the process. And I've put there the bonus, don't give people a choice to do the old way. That's really important. Yep. So just to wrap up.
I'm wrapping up, good. So inputs, be clear about the process, embrace your responsibility as leaders, do the design work, do the thinking, do the architecture, building blocks to success, and build the capacity of your team, very, very clear. With the outputs around the product, be craftsman-like. Be very, very craftsman-like. Do what you said you were going to do. Beware of that implementation dip. We all experience it in different ways. You push through, you hold the line, and you come out the other end and you've made progress when you look back. Be clear about that. And lastly, be clear about those impact goals. Why are you doing it? Measure your success and communicate it. Seek transformation over actions, people. So let's stop killing ourselves and let's be driven by our students and the better futures we want to create for them. That's it, me done. Yep. Thank you.